She said I would never set foot in the executive boardroom. Today I renamed it after myself. Her swivel chair? I keep it in the storage room. A reminder that underestimating the wrong person is the fastest way to lose an entire company. My story doesn't begin when I was kicked out of the company I founded. It starts with a broken kitchen table and a mocked dream. 9 years ago. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I'm about to tell you how I lost everything I built, only to take it all back with a single dollar bill. The first time I realized I might be onto something big, I was hunched over a secondhand laptop in my tiny Minneapolis studio apartment. The heating barely worked, and I could see my breath fog in the December air despite being indoors. But the cold didn't matter. I was too absorbed in the lines of code scrolling across my screen. I'd been working on a data model for 18 straight hours. What started as a wild idea during my corporate communications job had morphed into an obsession. A behavioral data-driven media risk assessment model that could predict PR crises before they exploded. Back then, companies were still getting blindsided by social media disasters. They had no real-time pulse on how their messaging resonated with actual humans. They were flying blind. My apartment had become a shrine to this idea. Sticky notes covered every surface. My whiteboard, salvaged from a university dumpster and lovingly named Betty, dominated the living space, covered in algorithms and user flow sketches. My kitchen table had one leg propped up with a stack of machine learning textbooks. I ate ramen for dinner 5 nights a week, saving every penny for cloud computing costs. The laptop, a battle-scarred HP that wheezed like an asthmatic dragon whenever I ran complex calculations, was my only real tool. But that night, as the program finally compiled successfully, displaying a heat map of sentiment analysis across 6 different media channels simultaneously, I knew I had something special. "Holy shit," I whispered to the empty room. "It works." The model accurately predicted 3 major brand controversies from historical data, cases where companies had been caught flat-footed despite obvious warning signs. My algorithm detected the pattern days before each crisis erupted. I named it Pulse Thread, because it could detect the subtle undercurrents of public sentiment that eventually became dominant narratives. It tracked the threads that connected isolated comments into powerful movements. Over the next year and a half, PulseThread grew from an idea into a legitimate startup. I recruited 2 former colleagues, Priya Sharma, a brilliant data scientist who believed in the vision enough to take a 70% pay cut, and Aiden Chen, a UX designer who could translate our complex analytics into interfaces clients actually understood. We worked out of my apartment until the neighbors complained about our late-night coding sessions. Then we moved to a cramped co-working space where the Wi-Fi crashed every afternoon at 2:13 p.m., like clockwork. Later, we upgraded to a small office above a Thai restaurant, our papers perpetually smelling of lemongrass and fish sauce. But we were making progress. We landed our first client, a mid-sized consumer goods company, willing to take a chance on our beta product. When their CEO called to tell us we'd help them avoid a potentially disastrous product launch by identifying negative sentiment patterns early, I cried after hanging up the phone. By month 18, we had 11 clients, 6 figures in revenue, and a working prototype that outperformed competitors twice our size. We weren't profitable yet, but we were close. More importantly, we were solving a real problem. That's when Northmark Group entered the picture. They weren't the biggest investment firm in the Midwest, but they had a solid portfolio of marketing and analytics companies. When their email landed in my inbox expressing interest in exploring acquisition opportunities, I forwarded it to Priya and Aiden with a laughing emoji. Surely they didn't mean us. We were too small, too unproven. But they did mean us. The initial meeting took place at their downtown Minneapolis office, all glass, steel, and intimidating views of the skyline. I wore my only professional outfit, black pants, navy blazer, both slightly too big, and carried my presentation materials in a folder because I couldn't afford a proper portfolio case. Calvin Drake led the meeting, flanked by his team of analysts and lawyers. At 40-something, with carefully styled salt and pepper hair and a watch that probably cost more than our quarterly overhead, He exuded the confidence of someone who had never worried about making rent. Pulse Thread has impressive early results, he said, after I'd run through our presentation. Your behavioral analysis approach is novel. We think it could complement several companies in our portfolio. I tried not to look too excited. We're considering several growth paths, including seeking Series A funding. Calvin smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Here's what we're thinking. Northmark acquires PulseThread and integrates it with our level metric platform. You stay on as Chief Strategy Officer to guide development. We provide the capital to scale operations globally. The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. On one hand, it validated everything we'd built. On the other, it meant giving up control of my baby. What kind of valuation are you considering? I asked, trying to sound like someone who discussed millions of dollars every day. We'll need to perform due diligence, of course, Calvin replied smoothly. But we're thinking something in the neighborhood of... The number he named made my stomach drop. It was insultingly low, barely enough to pay back our initial investors and cover outstanding debts. No windfall for the team. No security. That's significantly below market for comparable acquisitions, I said, grateful my voice didn't shake. Perhaps, Calvin acknowledged. But you're pre-Series A, pre-profitable, and frankly, your client retention metrics are concerning. We're taking on considerable risk. I wanted to argue, our retention was actually impressive for the industry. But he continued before I could speak. However, we're prepared to offer something more valuable than cash. Opportunity. As part of Northmark's portfolio, you'll have access to enterprise-level clients you couldn't reach for years on your own. The partnership accelerates your vision. He wasn't entirely wrong. Breaking into enterprise clients had been our biggest challenge. They loved our product during demos, but hesitated to trust crucial risk assessment to a startup operating above a Thai restaurant. The negotiations stretched over weeks. I consulted with Daniel Vega, an attorney friend who specialized in tech acquisitions and had been helping us pro bono because he believed in what we were building. This offer is light on cash, heavy on promises, Daniel warned, examining the term sheet in his modest office. But there might be a way to protect yourself. Together, we crafted a counteroffer that included something unusual. The company would technically be sold for $1, but with significant earn-out provisions tied to performance metrics and a special clause buried in the legal language of Section 14B. This clause stipulated that if I was terminated without cause within 5 years of acquisition, I retained the right to repurchase the original Delaware-registered corporation, the legal entity that held all the intellectual property, for the same price, $1. To my surprise, Northmark accepted the counteroffer with minimal pushback. They seemed more focused on the earn-out caps than the termination provisions. In retrospect, I doubt Calvin even read Section 14B carefully. Why would he? In his world, founders were eager to cash out, not plotting to regain control. The day we signed the acquisition papers, Northmark threw a small reception. Calvin raised a toast to PulseThread joining the Northmark family and revolutionizing media analytics together. I smiled and clinked glasses with everyone, ignoring the knot in my stomach. Later, I found a quiet moment with Priya and Aiden. Did we do the right thing? Aiden asked, voicing what we were all thinking. We get to build PulseThread at scale now, I said. That's what matters. Priya nodded thoughtfully. Just remember what my grandmother always says. When a tiger invites you to dinner, it doesn't mean you're a guest. I should have listened more carefully. The first few months after acquisition seemed promising. We moved into Northmark's sleek offices. We got new equipment, better healthcare, even a dedicated development team. Clients who had previously hesitated now signed contracts. On paper, things were going well. But beneath the surface, subtle shifts were occurring. It started when I arrived one morning to find Betty, my whiteboard with all the original PulseThread architecture diagrams, gone from my office. Where's my whiteboard? I asked the office manager. Oh, Mr. Drake had it moved to storage, she replied casually. He thought it made the space look cluttered during client visits. When I went to retrieve it, I discovered Betty had already been wiped clean and repurposed for the marketing department. Then came the brand evolution meeting. Madeline Avery, Northmark's recently hired brand director, presented her vision for PulseThread's new identity. The term analytics sounds cold, she explained, clicking through her presentation. We're going with emotional engagement instead. I blinked, confused. But we're literally an analytics platform. That's our core function. Madeline smiled the way adults smile at children who don't understand basic concepts. Research shows that decision makers respond to emotional language. Analytics feels technical and intimidating. It is technical, I countered. That's the point. Our clients need precise data, not fuzzy feelings. Let's table the terminology discussion, Calvin interjected smoothly. Madeline, continue with the visual identity. What followed was a slow-motion horror show. Our clean, minimalist dashboard, designed for maximum information clarity, was being replaced with rounded edges, pastel colors, and an animated mascot, a bouncing blue ball with blinking eyes named Blinky. Blinky will guide users through the experience, Madeline explained. He'll appear when insights need attention. Our clients are Fortune 500 communications directors, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. They don't need a cartoon ball blinking at them during a potential PR crisis. Calvin leaned forward. Rachel, analytics is a commodity. Every platform has algorithms. What differentiates us is user experience. 1. What differentiates us is accuracy, I corrected. Our predictive model outperforms competitors by 23%. And that's fantastic, Calvin said patronizingly. But we need to package that accuracy in an engaging wrapper. I lost that battle, and many more after it. Each week brought new improvements that moved us further from my original vision. Our detailed risk assessment metrics were simplified into 3 categories: all clear, pay attention, and act now, each represented by Blinky in different colors. Priya resigned 4 months in, after the R&D budget was cut by 60% to fund a marketing campaign. They don't understand what makes this technology special, she told me during her last week. I'm going back to academia, where at least the politics are honest. Aiden lasted another 2 months before accepting an offer from a West Coast tech giant. I'm sorry, Rachel, he said, genuine regret in his eyes. But I'm designing animated transitions for a cartoon eyeball. My soul is dying. I stayed, growing increasingly isolated. In meetings, I was introduced as our founder, like a historical artifact rather than an active contributor. My strategic input was noted but never implemented. My access to development resources dwindled until I couldn't even make minor updates to the algorithm without 3 levels of approval. Calvin began referring to me as the company's heart and soul in client meetings, a phrase that sounded complimentary but effectively positioned me as symbolic rather than essential. Rachel reminds us of our roots, he would say, his hand on my shoulder, while we focus on the future. 8 months after acquisition, I was effectively a ghost in the company I'd created. My title remained Chief Strategy Officer, but my role had been reduced to appearing at client dinners to tell the founding story like some kind of corporate folklore. The breaking point came during a quarterly review meeting. I had prepared a detailed analysis showing how our accuracy had declined 17% since the user experience improvements were implemented. The dashboard simplification had obscured early warning signals that our original model had been designed to catch. I presented my findings methodically, concluding with a proposal to restore key technical features while maintaining the new visual design. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Calvin cleared his throat. That's an interesting perspective, Rachel. Very analytical. Madeline nodded sympathetically. You engineers always think in terms of data points, but users think in terms of experiences. Our users are professional communicators managing brand risk, I countered. Their experience should prioritize accuracy. Speaking of brand, Calvin continued as if I hadn't spoken. Madeline has some exciting news about our upcoming rebrand. Rebrand? This was the first I'd heard of it. We're evolving from Pulse Thread to Pulse 360, Madeline announced proudly. More dynamic, more comprehensive. We're also phasing out the thread imagery in favor of a circular motif that suggests completeness. I stared at the mock-ups on screen, a complete departure from everything we had built. The logo, the interface, even the core language used to describe our functions. It was like watching someone paint over a masterpiece with neon graffiti. You can't just change everything that makes us recognizable to clients, I protested. Actually, we can, Calvin said, his tone suddenly cooler. That's the benefit of being part of Northmark. We have the resources to evolve beyond a startup mentality. A startup mentality is what built this company, I shot back. And now we're building something bigger, he replied. The question is whether you're growing with us, Rachel. The subtext was clear: get on board or get out. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, a nicer one than my original studio, but somehow feeling just as empty. On my laptop screen was the acquisition contract. Section 14B highlighted in yellow. In the event that Rachel Monroe is terminated without cause within 5 years of the effective date, Monroe shall have the right to repurchase PulseThread Inc., Delaware Corp., DL78942, for consideration equal to the original purchase price, $1.000 USD. Daniel had insisted on this clause as protection against exactly the situation I now found myself in. At the time, I thought it was excessive caution. Now it felt like foresight. I called Daniel the next morning. Is the clause still valid? I asked after explaining the situation. They've changed so much about the company. The underlying corporate structure hasn't changed, Daniel explained. They've been operating PulseThread as a subsidiary rather than fully merging it into Northmark's corporate entity. The Delaware Corporation still exists and still holds the original intellectual property and patents. So if they fire me, you can buy it back for $1. But Rachel, he cautioned, they'd have to fire you without cause. If you quit or give them reason to terminate you for cause, the clause is void. I understood what he was saying. I needed to be strategic, patient. I needed to wait for them to make the move. One more question, I said. If I do get the company back, what would I actually have? They've changed everything. You'd have the original code, the patents, and the legal right to operate. You wouldn't have the client relationships developed under Northmark, the new branding, or any improvements made since acquisition. But you'd have the foundation. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, a chance to start over, to rebuild. I printed out Section 14B and kept it in my laptop case, a constant reminder of my potential escape hatch. Then I returned to work with a new strategy. Be professional, but unmistakably resistant to the new direction. Not enough to justify firing me for cause, but enough that they'd eventually decide I was more trouble than I was worth. I stopped fighting the rebrand publicly, but sent detailed emails documenting my concerns, creating a paper trail showing I was acting in the company's best interests. I attended every meeting, contributed thoughtfully, but consistently advocated for the technical integrity that had made PulseThread successful. Calvin grew increasingly frustrated with my presence. In meetings, his jaw would tighten whenever I spoke. Madeline took to interrupting me mid-sentence. Other executives stopped making eye contact. I was being frozen out, exactly as I'd hoped. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday. The caller ID showed HR Director. Rachel, do you have a moment to stop by my office before the end of day? Margaret from HR asked, her voice professionally neutral. Of course, I replied, trying to contain my excitement. This was it. The standard end-of-day, end-of-week termination timing designed to minimize workplace disruption. I took 15 minutes to gather my personal items, back up crucial documents to my personal drive, nothing proprietary, just my own notes and observations, and prepare mentally. Then I walked calmly to Margaret's office, Section 14B folded in my pocket. The meeting was brief and awkward. Calvin was present, along with a lawyer I hadn't met before. Margaret read from a prepared statement about strategic realignments and different visions for the company's future. Calvin studied his hands, avoiding eye contact. We've decided to eliminate the Chief Strategy Officer position. Margaret concluded, this is a without cause termination, and you'll receive the separation package outlined in your contract. I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression despite the victory chant in my head. I understand. We'd like to thank you for your contributions to the company, Calvin added stiffly. Your severance includes 6 months' salary and healthcare continuation. That's generous, I said, meaning it. The severance would give me runway to rebuild. What followed was the corporate equivalent of a perp walk. Margaret escorted me to my desk where a security guard waited to ensure I didn't take anything unauthorized. They watched as I collected my coffee mug, a photo of my parents, and a small plant. My badge was deactivated before I reached the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the office, people pretending not to watch, Calvin already striding away, Madeline smirking slightly. I wondered if they thought I was devastated, if they expected tears or anger. They had no idea what was coming. I walked 6 blocks to Daniel's office, where he was waiting. Without a word, he handed me a pen and a crisp check for $1 made out to Northmark Group. Are you sure about this? He asked as I signed the letter exercising my rights under Section 14B. More sure than I've ever been, I replied. Daniel notarized the documents and sent them via courier to Northmark's legal department with copies to their board of directors. Then we waited. The call came the next morning, not from Calvin or HR, but from Jeffrey Williams, Northmark's chief legal officer. Ms. Monroe, there seems to be some confusion regarding your separation from the company, he began, his tone carefully measured. No confusion, Mr. Williams, I replied. I'm exercising my contractual right under Section 14B to repurchase Pulse Thread Inc. for the original sale price of $1. A pause. That clause was not intended to be exercised in this manner. Nevertheless, it's valid and binding, as your team will confirm when they review the executed acquisition documents. Another, longer pause. We should discuss this in person. I have availability this afternoon. I'm happy to meet. I agreed. I'll bring my attorney. The meeting took place in a conference room I'd sat in countless times before, but now as an outsider, Jeffrey was flanked by 2 other lawyers. Calvin sat at the far end, his face an alarming shade of red. Daniel and I sat calmly across from them, our documents neatly arranged. After review, we acknowledged the existence of Clause 14B. Jeffrey began reluctantly. However, we contend that its application is limited by several factors, including subsequent amendments to the corporate structure. Daniel smiled slightly. We've examined those amendments. None supersede or modify the original clause. Furthermore, none properly merge the Delaware Corporation into Northmark's primary business entity. The intellectual property remains held by the original corporation, which is the specific entity referenced in Section 14B. What followed was 3 hours of legal wrangling, thinly veiled threats, and increasingly desperate counter-offers. They offered to triple my severance, then to create a new position for me. Finally, to sell me the company for a reasonable market value. Through it all, Daniel and I held firm. The clause was clear. The right was mine. The price was $1. By late afternoon, the fight had gone out of them. Their own legal team had confirmed what we already knew. The clause was ironclad. Fine, Calvin finally spat, speaking for the first time in over an hour. Take the damn shell company. It's worthless without our client relationships anyway. I smiled. Thank you for confirming the transfer. I'll have my team coordinate with yours on the transition details. As we stood to leave, Calvin couldn't contain himself. You planned this from the beginning, he accused. You deliberately antagonized us until we fired you. No, Calvin, I replied quietly. You planned this from the beginning. You acquired my company with the intention of stripping away everything that made it valuable. The difference is, I read the fine print. The aftermath was chaotic. Northmark sent a company-wide email announcing a mutual separation that allowed me to pursue other ventures with technology not central to Northmark's vision. They tried to frame it as a minor restructuring, but rumors spread quickly. Madeline posted a passive-aggressive LinkedIn update about the cost of living in the past instead of embracing innovation. Calvin refused to comment publicly, but reportedly broke a conference room chair during a private meeting. Meanwhile, I was busy rebuilding. The first order of business was securing new office space. I found a modest suite in a building 2 blocks from Northmark's headquarters. It was smaller and less polished, but it had excellent natural light and a high-end coffee machine that I splurged on as my first business expense. On the main wall, I framed 2 items side by side, a copy of Section 14B and the uncashed $1 check. Underneath, a small plaque read, "The Price of Arrogance." The next challenge was rebuilding the team. I reached out to Priya first, finding her teaching at the university. "You did what?" she asked, eyes wide with disbelief when I explained what had happened. "I got Pulse Thread back," I repeated. "The original code, the patents, everything that matters, and I'm starting over." She laughed, shaking her head. "You crazy, brilliant woman. When do we start?" Aiden was harder to convince, comfortable in his new role at the tech giant. But after a video call where I showed him our new space and outlined my vision for a redesigned platform that honored both function and form, he was in. "I've been designing emoji animations for teenagers," he admitted. "My soul is still dying. When can I fly back?" Within 2 weeks, I had secured a small team of 5, Priya and Aiden, plus Ella Johnson, our former customer success manager who had quit Northmark a month after me, Leo Park, a brilliant developer I'd met at a hackathon, and Mia Torres, a recent MBA who specialized in startup growth strategies. We gathered in our new office, still partially unfurnished, with whiteboards propped against walls and extension cords snaking across the floor, and I outlined our mission. "We're not just rebuilding what Northmark took from us," I explained. "We're creating something better. Pulse Thread was good. What we build next will be exceptional." We decided to rename the company. Pulse Thread had too much baggage now, too much association with Northmark's failed vision. After a day of brainstorming, we settled on Pulse Forge, maintaining the connection to our roots while suggesting something stronger, something tempered by fire. Our new logo featured a phoenix rising from the ashes of a partially burned dollar bill. The real work began then, long days and longer nights, fueled by that expensive coffee machine and collective determination. We rebuilt the core algorithm. Incorporating improvements Priya had developed during her academic research, Aiden designed a new interface that balanced analytical depth with intuitive navigation. No blinking cartoon mascots required. Financing was our biggest hurdle. I had my severance and a small amount saved, but not nearly enough to fund a proper relaunch. Traditional investors were wary. My story made for interesting conversation. But backing someone who had just executed a hostile take-back of their own company seemed risky. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 former clients contacted me after hearing rumors about what had happened. They had been unhappy with the changes Northmark had made to the platform and wanted to know if my new venture would return to the original approach. "We don't just want to be clients," the communications director of a major airline told me during a meeting. "We want to be partners, early adopters with input on development." These 3 companies provided the bridge funding we needed, enough to cover 6 months of operations in exchange for discounted lifetime subscriptions and priority feature requests. It wasn't venture capital, but it was something more valuable: validation from the market. 4 months after my termination from Northmark, PulseForge launched its beta platform. We started with a small, invitation-only client list, focused on quality over quantity. Word spread quickly in the industry. By month 6, we had a waiting list. Meanwhile, Northmark was struggling. Without the original algorithm and with key team members departed, their rebranded Pulse 360 product was underperforming. They had the clients and the marketing budget, but the technology wasn't delivering as promised. I didn't actively poach their clients. I didn't need to. They came to us as their Northmark contracts expired. drawn by industry chatter about our superior performance metrics and the authentic expertise of our team. The turning point came when I was invited to give a keynote address at Comtech, the largest communications technology conference in the country. My talk was scheduled directly against Calvin's panel discussion on the future of engagement analytics. The room was packed, partly with people interested in our technology, partly with industry rubberneckers eager to witness the next chapter in what had become something of a legendary corporate drama. I began by telling the story of PulseThread's birth, the late nights in my freezing apartment, the broken kitchen table, the Thai restaurant office. Then I told the story of its acquisition and transformation. When Northmark acquired us, they saw potential but missed the point. I explained. They thought our value was in a concept that could be repackaged. What they didn't understand was that our value was in precision, in the intricate mapping of behavioral patterns that our algorithm could detect. I clicked to a slide showing side-by-side comparisons of prediction accuracy between original PulseThread data, Northmark's Pulse 360, and our new PulseForge platform. The difference was stark and unmistakable. In trying to make analytics more palatable, they made it less useful, I continued. They replaced insight with animation, precision with approximation. And in doing so, they undermined the very thing clients were paying for. The final part of my presentation was about PulseForge, our vision, our rebuilt platform, our early results. I concluded by pulling the framed dollar check from my bag and holding it up. This is how I reclaimed my office from the people who fired me, I said, my voice steady. Not with venture capital or corporate politics, but with careful planning and one very specific contract clause that they never thought I'd use. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped off stage, my phone buzzed with emails and messages from potential clients, from investors suddenly interested, from industry reporters requesting interviews. That evening, our team celebrated at a restaurant across from our office. Through the window, we could see the Northmark building illuminated against the night sky, still bigger, still shinier, but no longer intimidating. To Rachel, Priya raised her glass. Who taught us all that the fine print matters? To PulseForge, I countered. And to everyone who believed we could build it twice, better the second time. As we were leaving, my phone rang with an unknown number. I stepped outside to answer. Rachel Monroe. The voice was familiar but unexpected. Madeline Avery. I'm surprised to hear from you, Madeline, I said neutrally. I'm calling because... She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because you were right, about the platform, about what clients actually needed. I waited, saying nothing. Calvin's been let go, she continued. The board held an emergency meeting after the quarterly results. They're looking for new leadership for the division. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, not entirely truthfully. I'd like to meet, she said abruptly, to discuss potential collaboration. Northmark has the client base, you have the superior technology. There might be a way forward that benefits both companies. I considered her offer. It was tempting in some ways, an instant scaling opportunity, a vindication of sorts. But I remembered the whiteboard they'd erased, the vision they'd dismissed, the condescension and marginalization. Thank you for the offer, Madeline. But PulseForge is doing just fine on our own path. Don't be hasty, she pressed. This could be huge for you. It already is huge for me, I replied. I'm building exactly what I want to build, with people who share my vision. That's worth more than any partnership. I ended the call and rejoined my team, declining to mention the conversation. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. 1 year after the launch of PulseForge, we moved into new headquarters, a full floor in a recently renovated building with views of the river. We had grown to 23 employees, secured a proper Series A funding round, and established ourselves as the industry leader in predictive communications analytics. On moving day, as the team unpacked and arranged the new space, I walked through each area, the development pit with its clusters of standing desks, the client success pod with its comfortable meeting spaces, the kitchen with not one but 2 high-end coffee machines. Finally, I reached the executive suite, my new office. It was spacious but not ostentatious, with glass walls that could frost for privacy and a door that actually closed, a luxury I hadn't had in years. Inside, waiting to be unpacked, was a special item I'd commissioned, a new plaque for the dollar bill and contract clause, now in a more elegant frame. The engraving read, "She said I would never set foot in the executive boardroom. Today I own the building. Remember, never underestimate someone with nothing to lose and a contract to enforce." I hung it directly across from my desk, where I would see it every day, not as a reminder of bitterness or revenge, but of resilience and the power of believing in your own vision. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya. "CNN Tech wants to interview you tomorrow about the dollar bill comeback. You in?" I smiled and typed back, "Always. But tell them it's not about the dollar bill. It's about building something so good they can't ignore you, even after they try to erase you." As I set my phone down, I caught my reflection in the glass, tired eyes but a steady gaze. 9 years from a broken kitchen table to this moment. 9 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and finally vindicated. I thought about Calvin, wondering what he was doing now. I had heard rumors that he'd moved to a smaller firm, his reputation damaged by the Pulse 360 failure. I didn't wish him ill, exactly, but I didn't wish him particularly well either. He had been a lesson in my life, an expensive one, but valuable nonetheless. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for the CNN interview. As I walked to my office, I passed the small storage closet where we kept extra supplies and equipment. Inside, barely visible behind some boxes, was a chair I'd specifically requested when furnishing the new office. It was Calvin's custom executive chair from Northmark, the one he'd sat in while telling me I wasn't embracing the company's future. I'd purchased it when Northmark auctioned off excess furniture during their reorganization. I didn't use it. I didn't even display it. I just kept it there, out of sight but not forgotten. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't occupying someone else's throne, but building a better kingdom of your own. The CNN reporter arrived promptly at 9, setting up in our conference room. Before the cameras rolled, she asked me off the record, "What's the secret? How did you come back from such a complete loss?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "Always read the fine print, and never underestimate the girl who wrote it with blood, caffeine, and a chip on her shoulder." The cameras started rolling, and I began telling my story once more, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in resilience. Because in the end, owning my former boss's office wasn't about getting even, it was about getting it right.